Welcome to Profi Plays. I'm Profi, and for this video, I wanted to talk about Runehammer's campaign structure and really thinking about its potential as a solo RPG outline. So, Runehammer is the author who brought us things like Index Card RPG, ICRPG, has the Runehammer channel, right? And has a really good channel. He has great energy, great creativity that he brings to the stuff he does. He's much more creative than I am by far as that goes. Uh, but he released, it was several years ago on his podcast. I think it's RPG Mainframe, if I recall correctly, is the name of the podcast. So back around, I think it's early 2020, he released a couple episodes about how to structure a campaign. Right, so he had one episode where he discussed the beginning and the end, and another where he discussed mastering the middle. And so I will link those episodes down in the description so you can see the real thing right from him. But here I'm just going to provide a brief overview of how he suggests structuring a campaign, right? And naturally, he did it from the perspective of somebody who's a game master trying to structure a campaign for their players. But I think as I listened to these podcasts, I was just floored by how great the structure is and how I think that we can incorporate it as a solo RPG outline. So I think it's very useful potentially for those of us that are soloists. So with no further ado, let's get down to it. Right, so the basic structure that Runehammer suggests for a campaign is that any campaign should have a beginning, a middle, and an end. Yeah, that's it. And this idea of having Act 1, Act 2, Act 3 is nothing new, or the three-act structure is something you'll hear lots of people within the RPG community talk about now as a way to structure either your individual sessions or overall campaigns or anything in between, story arcs and the like. Right, so that is definitely at the heart of what Runehammer is talking about. What is really valuable isn't so much, oh, you should have three acts, but rather what is inside each of those acts. So let's go ahead and take a look first at the beginning. So we'll start at the very beginning, a very good place to start. Now, Runehammer does lay out with the beginning kind of what does session zero look like, right? Where you're sitting around with your friends, talking about what kind of things they want to do in the campaign, that kind of thing. I'm going to skip that part and focus more on once you get to thinking about game as a story, what's happening. Right? And one of the things he discusses is, I think he might have called it a session you know, zero point 0.5 or something like that, right? Where what is happening in the lives of the characters is just their normal life. Right? So what is happening before the campaign begins? Now, this is something you wouldn't bother playing because it'd be incredibly boring session, but nonetheless, it's something we need to think about whether we are gaming socially or whether we are gaming solely, right? Thinking about what is your character's life like before, right, they get pulled into whatever the adventure happens to be. Right. The next step then is the attack. The attack is some significant event that happens that requires action on the part of your players, or in the case of the soloist, your character. Right now, it's phrased the attack really because a lot of the time it's going to be a combat. Right? Bad guys show up, whoever it happens to be, bad guys show up, do something, and then you have to respond in some way. And so that is the attack. Now, it doesn't have to be a combat though. It could be some other cataclysmic event that happens, right? So storms or something like this could also serve this purpose. But nonetheless, most commonly you'll see some kind of combat. And let's face it, I think a lot of us kind of enjoy including combat in our gaming, so it makes sense, right, to actually have it be a combat. Anyway, right, so the next step then, after the attack happens, that is this disruption to normal life that requires a change in our life, right, then we have the revelation of some kind of a mystery. Now, the example that he gave was something like the attack happens, you thought it was one group attacking you, but then you rip off their masks and find out, no, it was actually this other group that was attacking you. No, these aren't orcs at all, or these are dwarves or whatever. That would be quite a disguise as I think about it. Right. So we have the revelation of some kind of mystery. Okay, so then this raises questions. Whatever it is, whatever this clue is that you find, it has to raise questions of, okay, what is actually happening here? Right. The next step would be what Runehammer describes as the errands. Right. So errands is where you just have various little tasks that you have to do, things you have to get in line, right? And this may be things like, oh, well, this is leading us toward this other clue, so we're going to run over here and we're going to check out that clue. We're going to run over here and we're going to check out that clue. Or we need to leave the farm, so we need to make sure somebody's going to take care of it. So we need to run and do something to make sure somebody's going to take care of the farm. There's all these really low-level things, the kinds of things that I imagine, like when I was playing, when you kind of first start playing Skyrim and you go into, what is it, Whiterun maybe? Or river or something. But that first little town, and you have these little things that you're supposed to do. It's those types of tasks. But as you're running these errands, you are bumping up against the villain's plans in some way. Right? So it may not be something that's obvious to you, but you reveal, right, other little clues along the way, right? Or you do something and then bad guys show up. Right? So you have this oddity of what's going on, kind of a reminder of that mystery that is happening here. The end of the beginning is when the villain reveals themselves in some way that is very clear. Right? So this is really kind of the discussion of where the villain shows up, says, "Hey, y'all are messing with my plans. You got to stop." That is really what the villain reveal is. Now, this is not where we're going to then hit the finale. The finale doesn't come till the end. We're in the beginning still. But here, now you know who the villain is. You're probably aware of what their plan is. They're going to end up revealing that, or at least a part of their plan, enough of it, you get some sense of what you have to do about it. And then that getting some sense of what you have to do about it brings us into the next part. That is the middle. Right? So the middle is defined really by kind of three elements. First is what Runehammer calls lock and key. That is, you know what you need to do. Right? So you effectively have this lock that you have to handle. However, you don't have the key yet. Right, so everything that you're doing in the middle is really about getting the key, right? So what are those elements that you have to get together, right? So for perhaps you say, oh, well, this particular type of villain can only be defeated by a particular potion that we have to mix, but in order to get this potion mixed, we have to get all of these various rare, hard to find ingredients, right? So then we have in mind, right, okay, we know what the lock is, we know what the key is, we just have to go get it, right? So at this point, it's very clear what the path forward is going to have to be. Another element of the middle is that there's tit for tat happening. That is, that the heroes do something to try to progress right toward getting the key so they can handle the lock, and then the villain is going to try to progress as well, right? Trying to offset whatever it is that the players have done, right? And also try to progress their own plan, whatever that happens to be, right? So we have then this mix of four different things happening in the middle. That is, the heroes moving forward with trying to get the lock, the heroes trying to offset or slow down whatever the villain is trying to do, the villain trying to move forward with its own plans, and then we have the villain trying to offset whatever the heroes are trying to do. And so notice here there's going to be a lot of direct interaction between the villain and their forces and the heroes as well. Another final important element here, or rather lack of element, is that at this point there are no more mysteries. Right? We know what's happening. We know what we have to do. We know what they're trying to do. We're not in the figuring out stage anymore. Instead, we're in the execution stage, right? So each of us is trying to do the thing that we need to do faster than the other one can do the thing that they're trying to do, right? So that is really a key element in the middle. And then you come to the end, right? So to transition from the middle to the end, a couple things have to happen. And really the big thing is the setback. So the setback is some significant event, whatever it happens to be, that is going to create significant problems for our heroes. That could be all kinds of things. Like, you have in mind the most obvious thing would be something like a member of uh, the party dying, or an important NPC dying, right? These types of things. That's a significant setback, right? Or you lose, right, some important thing that you need, right? Or at least is useful, right, to you. Right, so you have some significant setback, and what that does then, that sparks in our heroes the idea that we have to put an end to this now. Right? That is the role dramatically of the setback, is that it pushes our heroes not just toward action, which is what the original attack did, but rather toward a finality. Right? They want now to hit the finale, right? It's not enough, right? Just to keep trying to offset whatever is being done by the villain. We have to put an end, right, to it. And then that leads to a plan. And the plan is then tied with the checkmate, right? So we come up with some kind of plan that we think is going to work, or that is going to then put an end to whatever it is the villain is trying to do, and then the checkmate, we carry out that plan. Now, the last element, which I'm calling the zoom out, or you can call it the sunset, I forget exactly what Runehammer calls it, but the idea here is one of the big challenges, and this is true. I find like anytime that I haven't written very many stories, it's more kind of my wife's thing. But whenever I write stories, coming up with a satisfying ending is really, really difficult, right? So you have like the big boss fight, and then to just stop at that point feels weird because you feel like, well, but there are still like these little loose ends here and there. I feel like we want to clean this stuff up. Like there's this cleaning process that needs to happen. I think it's important that we avoid that temptation. Instead, we acknowledge that checkmate, as in chess, is the end of the game. Yes, there may still be pawns and bishops and rooks on the board, but that doesn't really matter. What matters is that now the game is over. So what we need to do then, when the game is over, is move the camera back from the game. So this is the zooming out, right, or the sunset process, where you move away from the heroes and villain, right, and back away from them. So then you can see what's happening in the town, in the kingdom, in the world, right, and in the cosmos, as things achieve, right, some new sense of peace and normality, right, after the villain has been defeated or has succeeded, depending on kind of which direction you want to go with this, right? So that's, I think it's a really cool device for how do you bring things to an end, right? And that you don't try to tie up every single loose end. Instead, we acknowledge, right, that in real life, there are always loose ends, right? So, I mean, like right now, my wife and I are in the middle of cleaning up our house, which I think we've been in the middle of cleaning up our house like for 10 years when we moved into this house. It's, it's just the way things work, right? You never get all your loose ends tied up, but what you can do is change the focus, right? So that these little mundane things, we can make the game really boring by trying to tie up all the loose ends before we end, right? Or we can end on the high note and then zoom out and say, you know what, there's other things. There are other adventures to be had. Like, shopping trip is not a great adventure for most people, right? So that would be the end. So now, how does this relate to those of us who are interested in doing solo play and looking for some guidance about that? Right. So one of the challenges is, right, what happens next? What do we do next? Right. And then especially, how do we finish? Right? At what point do we hit the end? There was a while that when I first started soloing, that I would basically play every character until they died, and I kind of loved when my characters died, in part because that was a very clear end point. And so I played out. They were doing things. They were exploring dungeons or what have you. They were exploring wildernesses, and they'd get into a fight, and finally I'd randomly roll a monster or a set of monsters that they just could not overcome, and they die. And say, "Oh, thank goodness, I get to start over." Right? That's not necessarily narratively very satisfying, though. Right? So how do we handle all this? And I think this is where Runehammer steps in and provides some really good guidance. Because I know for myself, and certainly if you watch, say, the story of Kinson, which is my actual play that I'm posting right now, every it's irregularly, but as I post that, one thing you may notice is that anytime I'm not sure what happens next, my default, and I think this is true for many of us that are soloists, is to roll on a random table. The problem with rolling on random tables is that they're random, right? So this might make sense at certain points, but at other points it's going to start derailing things, right? So, for example, right, say we're at the beginning. So we know we're in the beginning. I want to start with an exciting story. What does Runehammer tell us? Start with the attack. So that tells me, like, right off the bat, I'm not going to start with session 0.5. We're just mundanely doing stuff and then rolling, uh, find some random thing that happens. No, no, no. No, we're going to start with an attack. It has to be something aggressive that I have to deal with, right? A lot of random tables don't necessarily guarantee that, right? So this allows us then to, and we might use a random table to say, well, what does the attack look like? But we know going in that it's going to be an attack, right? That is the way that things are happening, right? And then also, if we're in that beginning, what do we do next? Well, we can reveal clues. We can go on an errand, right? These are the types of things that should be happening where we are building up a mystery. We're trying to figure out what that mystery is like. We are going on errands to get things set up so we can deal with that mystery, or so that we can get the elements of the mystery put together. Maybe we hit the point where we're tired at the beginning. Well, how do we get out of it? How do you stop going on all these little tiny errands and finding clues that you're not quite sure how to connect? The villain reveals themselves, right? So this is the point where you decide, we have all of these clues, who could possibly be behind it? You make a decision about who that might possibly be. Maybe you have some help from random tables, that's fine, right? But you make a decision on who it's going to be, and they reveal themselves in a way that is obvious, right, to the main characters. So then that brings a clarity that now they don't have to go on errands anymore. In fact, that would be a distraction. They don't have to go looking for clues anymore, figuring out what they are. In fact, that would be pointless because we know what is happening. We need to deal with that. Right? And then we hit the middle, right? So once we hit the middle, then we're looking for that lock and key, right? So we now know, because we know what what they're doing, figure out what does the lock look like, what does the key or the keys look like, and then play that tit for tat. Right, so what happens next? Well, if we say last time we went and we found, right, this piece of thing that we needed, well, now it's time for the villain to do something, right? And that something is going to be something that interacts with or interferes with what our heroes are doing, right? So we need to think in that way if we're in the middle. So we are directly, right, opposing each other, right? So we should see more direct action between the heroes and the villains in that middle time. Right? And then are we ready to bring an end to that middle? We're kind of tired, right, of tit for tat, of all of this going back and forth, right? What is the next step? Well, the next step, right, is we have to suffer a setback. Have the villain do something big that is a significant harm that does not take the key away, right? Still leaves us with the key, but nonetheless, we are harmed to the point that we know we need to bring things to an end now. Right, so we can do that final checkmate. Once that checkmate is over, we have the discipline to say, this is the end of the story. We're going to zoom out, we're going to watch the sunset, and we're going to move away from these characters. Now, of course, that doesn't mean these characters are gone forever. Right? You can always, say, start a new campaign with the same character, then progress that kind of way. But you can always take some of these loose ends that are still out there and you know, have some of them develop, perhaps turn into an attack. Right after this new sense of normalcy that we got from the sunset, it's broken again. Right? It's one story after another. Right? That's of course perfectly fine. Right? So I really like a lot of the ideas here in terms of the structure. It's something that I've started thinking about in terms of how can I apply this, right, to my own solo role playing. And all I don't know that I'm going to be able to do it very well, right? But it's something at least I'm thinking about in terms of how should things work? Right? And I also am thinking about this as I'm running D&D for my kids. So where are we in this process, right? So I have in mind, this big bad they're not ready to deal with yet. At what point should I reveal that to them? And then that's going to change the way the story looks from that point on. And so that is something that I just thought I would share. Right. So yes, we're always told, think in terms of beginning, middle, and end. How do we get between them? At the end of the beginning, villain reveal. At the end of the middle, we have a setback that brings about the end, that brings us toward the end. That is really, I think, a huge key to getting a narrative story that will fit together, even if we are not intending to create a narrative story. So just what did those scenes have to look like that would progress us from one part of the story to the next? I think this is really cool. If you want to experience, and would definitely suggest this, if you want to experience the full podcast episodes, links down in the description below. And that's it from me. So this is Prof E signing off.